A powerful CEO poisoned a town to hide his crimes. He thought the truth would sink forever beneath the river he destroyed. But fate had other plans, because a broken war veteran and his loyal German shepherd just moved into the only diner that stood above his buried secret. They weren't looking for revenge. They were searching for peace. Yet, what they found was a war for the soul of an entire town. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves your heart, please subscribe for more tales of faith, courage, and second chances. Chapter 1. Ashes and Sparks. The morning fog hung low over Harbor Glen, clinging to the dock cranes and broken masts like a tired ghost reluctant to leave. The smell of salt and rust ruled the air, mingling with the bitter scent of coffee from a diner that had seen better decades. Jack Miller stood at the pier's edge, his hands shoved deep into a frayed canvas jacket, watching the tide lap against the hulls of ships too old to leave and too proud to sink. He was 45, broad-shouldered but worn thin, his once strong frame softened by years of labor and sleepless nights. A crooked scar ran from his left temple down to his jawline, an uninvited souvenir from a roadside explosion in Kandahar 12 years ago. His dark brown hair was streaked with gray, his beard trimmed short but uneven, and his steel blue eyes carried the faraway stillness of a man who had seen too much to ever look away again. Jack had been back from the war for 7 years, though sometimes, in the quiet between the waves, it felt like he never truly left. He had traded the roar of engines for the groan of dock machinery, the desert's heat for the chill breath of the Atlantic. The paycheck was barely enough to keep the lights on in his rented room, but it was honest work. He told himself that was enough. He didn't need more battles. He needed peace, or something that pretended to be it. Beside him sat Max, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a coat the color of burnt toast and shadows. Max was no ordinary pet. He had served in the canine unit, trained to sniff out explosives and track the lost. His left ear had a small notch, souvenir from the same explosion that carved Jack's scar. The two of them had been medically discharged on the same day, a pair of soldiers retired before their time. Max leaned against Jack's leg, amber eyes alert, his tail tapping lightly against the planks as if marking time to an invisible clock. In the silence, Max was the pulse that kept Jack tethered to the world. "Come on, partner," Jack muttered, voice rough as gravel. "Let's find a place that doesn't smell like diesel." They followed the cracked sidewalk past shuttered shops, Susan boarded windows, until the smell of frying oil and bacon broke through the gloom. The diner, Rita's Rail Stop, was tucked beside the old railway line, a squat building of faded red brick and a flickering neon sign that read, "Open, only when the wind blew right." The bell above the door gave a half-hearted ring as they entered. The place was nearly empty, save for a jukebox that hadn't worked since Clinton was president and a single waitress wiping down the counter. Rita Henderson, the owner, was somewhere between 60 and eternal. She was tall and wiry, with a mane of silver hair pinned haphazardly under a bandana, and skin the color of old ivory, mapped with lines of laughter and hard work. Her eyes, sharp hazel flecked with green, missed nothing. She had run this diner for 30 years and loved it the way some people love a stubborn husband, fiercely and with no illusions. "Well, I'll be damned," she said, eyeing the man and the dog. "You look like trouble, and he looks like he knows it." Jack managed the ghost of a smile. "We're harmless, mostly." Rita chuckled, tossing a rag over her shoulder. "Coffee's on the house for veterans, but the pie'll cost you a story, and maybe a little help in the kitchen if you're sticking around." That's how it started. A meal turned into a favor turned into a job. Washing dishes, fixing leaky pipes, mending the broken sign that hadn't lit properly in years. By the end of the week, Rita offered him the room behind the diner, small, drafty, but rent-free if he kept the place running. At night, after closing, Jack would sit on the back steps with Max, watching the freight trains roll by in the distance. Each rumble in the tracks vibrated through the soles of his boots and into the hollow space behind his ribs. Sometimes he talked to Max, telling stories about the desert, the men he'd lost, the ones he'd saved. Max listened in silence, head resting on Jack's knee, his breathing steady, his loyalty unspoken but understood. Rita would join them occasionally, lighting a cigarette she'd never finish. "You know," she said once, exhaling a cloud of smoke that curled like a question mark, "people come here to disappear. You, on the other hand, you look like a man trying to remember how to exist." Jack didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth was simpler than words. He was tired of fighting, but he didn't know what living felt like anymore. On the third week, something strange happened. Max began digging near the railway embankment every evening, always in the same spot, ears perked, tail stiff. Jack scolded him at first, thought he'd caught the scent of a raccoon, but the dog wouldn't stop. He'd stare at the ground, whining softly, then glance at Jack with that same intensity he used to wear in combat. One night, under the weak yellow light of the station lamp, Jack gave in. He grabbed a rusted shovel from behind the diner and began to dig. The earth was damp, heavy with salt and oil. Max pawed beside him, snout deep in the dirt. After a few minutes, the shovel hit something weird, a hollow metallic sound. Jack crouched, brushing away the soil until the edge of an old metal container appeared. It was about the size of a lunchbox, corroded but intact. Inside, something rattled. Jack hesitated, his breath clouding in the cold air. "What the hell did you find, boy?" Max whined, ears pinned, tail unmoving. The dog took a single step back, gaze fixed on the box as if it might bite. Jack lifted the lid slowly. A sharp chemical smell cut through the night. Inside lay a small stack of damp photographs, a key wrapped in cloth, and an envelope marked with one word, "For Rita." Jack froze, the sound of a distant train echoing through the dark. Behind him, the diner's neon sign flickered once, then went out completely. Chapter 2. The River Keeps Secrets. The next morning came gray and heavy, the kind of dawn that carried more silence than light. A mist rolled in from the Atlantic, swallowing the harbor and turning the fishing boats into faint silhouettes drifting in ghostly formation. Jack Miller stood outside Rita's diner, the metal box he'd found the night before, resting on the counter beside a mug of untouched coffee. Max lay at his feet, head on his paws, his amber eyes tracking the seagulls that circled but never landed anymore. The fish had been gone for months, the river that once fed Harbor Glen now a sickly shade of green. Rita arrived just after 7, her silver hair tied up, her apron already dusted with flour. She looked older in the morning light, as if sleep had scraped away the humor she wore like armor. Jack slid the envelope toward her. "Found this buried out by the rail line," he said. "It's got your name on it." Rita froze mid-motion, her eyes narrowing. She reached for the envelope with careful hands, as if it might burn. Her fingers trembled slightly as she peeled it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, the ink smudged but legible. As her eyes moved across the words, her face went pale. "It's from Paul," she whispered. Jack had never heard that name before. "Paul?" Rita folded the paper, her voice low. "My brother. He worked maintenance at the Norval plant before it shut down 5 years ago. He disappeared a week later. They said he drowned, but I knew that was a lie." She tapped the letter with a shaky finger. "He wrote this the day he went missing." "What does it say?" Jack asked. Rita's eyes met his, sharp and haunted. "It says, if you're reading this, I've found what they're dumping. Don't trust anyone from Norvale. They'll kill to keep it quiet." The words hung between them like a bad smell. Jack looked out toward the river. "So the rumors were true." Rita nodded slowly. "That plant's been closed for years, but their trucks still come through at night." Jack's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough cover-ups overseas to know the pattern. Profit buried beneath secrecy, truth drowned under convenience. He looked down at Max, who had lifted his head, ears pricked toward the sound of distant engines. Later that afternoon, Jack walked the path along the riverbank. The air was thick with the metallic tang of chemicals, not the clean salt of the sea. Max trotted ahead, tail stiff, nose working the wind. The town's old fishermen, what few were left, sat idle near their empty nets. One of them, Tommy Greaves, raised a hand in greeting. Tommy was in his 70s, with skin weathered like driftwood and a beard that looked more sea foam than hair. His left leg was a prosthetic, a rusted metal contraption from a logging accident decades ago. He was a man carved out of stubbornness and salt. "You won't catch much here. Anymore," he said, voice like sandpaper. "Used to be herring thick enough to walk on. Now it's just dead water." Jack crouched beside him, eyeing the river. "What changed?" Tommy spat into the dirt. "Norval changed. They said they'd bring jobs. All they brought was sickness." He scratched at his beard. "Saw fish floating belly up last spring. And my neighbor's boy worked night shifts at the plant. Ain't been right since. Skin broke out like he'd been burned." Jack felt a slow heat coil in his chest. "You ever report it?" "Who to?" Tommy snorted. Town council's in Norvale's pocket. You start asking questions, you end up moving away real quick. That night, the wind carried the faint hum of machinery from across the water. Max stood at the edge of the dock, staring into the darkness, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Jack followed his gaze and saw it. A faint ripple of light, unnatural and green, spreading under the surface like veins of poison. The next morning, while delivering scrap to the repair yard, Jack met Lily Carson for the first time. She couldn't have been more than 12, with a shock of chestnut hair tied in a crooked ponytail and freckles scattered across her nose like sunlight through leaves. Her jeans were 2 sizes too big, her sneakers worn down to fabric. She held a bundle of newspapers under one arm and a tin whistle in the other. "Paper, mister," she chirped, too bright for the gray day. Jack smiled faintly. "Depends. Good news or bad?" "Mostly bad," she said, grinning, "but I throw in a joke for free." Her voice wavered just slightly, the practiced cheerfulness of a kid used to masking hunger. Rita had mentioned her before, the girl who sold papers and odd trinkets to help her mother. But as they talked, Jack learned Lily's mother had passed 2 winters ago, and her father, a mechanic at Norval, had vanished without a trace. The police had called it an accident. She called it a lie. Max trotted over, sniffed her hand, then nudged her knee gently. She giggled. "Hey, big guy." Max responded with a wet lick to her cheek. Jack laughed for the first time in weeks. Over the next few days, Lily started dropping by the diner, leaving a paper and lingering just long enough for a sandwich and a story. Max adored her, followed her to the end of the block each morning like a self-assigned bodyguard. Rita teased Jack about his new family, and though he denied it, there was warmth behind the gruffness. But the river kept calling. Late one night, fog rolling thick as milk, Max began barking near the far side of the pier. Jack grabbed a flashlight and followed. Max was pawing at a section of mud near the old drainage ditch. The ground was slick, and the smell stung Jack's throat. He knelt, pushing away the reeds, and there it was, a steel hatch, half buried in muck, sealed shut with a new industrial padlock, the kind you didn't find at Sol hardware stores. "Easy, boy," Jack muttered, his stomach tightening. He shone the beam over the hatch. Chemical residue glistened faintly, rainbow-colored under the light, the same sickly hue he'd seen on the river the night before. Max whined, pressing close to his leg. Jack reached out and touched the lock. It was warm, recently handled. Someone had been here. From somewhere across the water came the echo of an engine revving, then stopping abruptly. The night fell silent except for the river's slow, poisoned heartbeat. Jack stood frozen, hands still on the hatch, as Max's ears flicked toward the trees. Then came the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. Chapter 3. The Men in Suits. The following morning carried the heavy scent of smoke. The diner's walls still wore the black fingerprints of the fire, thin streaks of soot reaching toward the ceiling, like prayers that had gone unanswered. Jack stood outside with a hammer in one hand, nails in the other, trying to board up the shattered window. His knuckles were scraped raw, but he worked quietly, his jaw set. Max sat beside him, muzzle dusted with ash, eyes watchful as if waiting for another threat to emerge from the gray horizon. The fire had started just before dawn. Jack had woken to the sound of Max barking, a deep, sharp rhythm that never meant anything good. They barely made it out before the back wall went up in flames. The fire department said faulty wiring. Jack knew better. He had seen the smell of gasoline before. At noon, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. Its engine purred, clean and expensive, the sound of a predator used to being fed. A man stepped out, tall, around 50, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked more like armor than clothing. His shoes gleamed, his tie was perfect, and his expression was carved from something colder than confidence. His name was Ethan Cole, CEO of the Norval Chemical Corporation, the man behind the poisoned river. Cole's hair was silver, but stylishly kept, his face smooth, except for 2 deep lines at the corners of his mouth that hinted at a lifetime of getting what he wanted. His eyes were pale gray, calculating, and when he smiled it was a shape rather than an emotion. He approached the diner slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, surveying the damage like an art critic inspecting a ruined painting. "Mr. Miller, isn't it?" Cole's voice was smooth, almost pleasant, but there was an undertone of command. "I heard about the unfortunate accident. Tragic, really. These old places are tinderboxes. Jack set the hammer down, wiping his hands on his jeans. You here to offer condolences or something else? Cole smiled thinly. Let's say I'm here to offer relief. To you, to Mrs. Henderson, to this town. Norval is willing to purchase this property generously, I might add. You've had enough misfortune. Why not let us clean the slate? Rita came out from inside, her hair tied up in a scarf, face still streaked with smoke. You mean you want to bury the evidence under fresh concrete? She said flatly. Cole turned toward her, still smiling but with less warmth. I admire your bluntness, Mrs. Henderson, but I assure you this is simply business. You can retire comfortably. Harbor Glen has seen its day. Jack's voice was calm, but the air around him tightened. No sale. Cole's eyes flicked to Max, who had risen, fur bristling, a low growl vibrating through his chest. I see your dog feels the same way, he said. Max has a good nose, Jack replied. He can smell rot a mile away. Cole's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a flicker of irritation, quickly buried. He slipped a card from his breast pocket and placed it on the counter. If you change your mind, Mr. Miller, I'll be in touch. But take my advice, some things are best left underground. He turned, stepped back into his car, and was gone before the dust from his tires settled. That night, the diner was quiet. Rita sat at the counter, staring at her brother's letter. Lily sat beside her, clutching a notebook she'd found near the river, a worker's logbook with names, dates, and symbols that looked like chemical codes. It was half buried near the old drainage ditch, she said. I thought it might be important. Jack flipped through the pages, brow furrowed. These look like dumping schedules. Every time there's heavy rain, they release waste into the river. No wonder the fish are gone. They decided to make a copy of everything. Jack used Rita's old camcorder to record the evidence. The logbook, the hatch, the discoloration in the water. We'll send it to the state environmental office, he said. They can't ignore it if it's on tape. By midnight, they had uploaded everything and sent it through every contact Rita had. Then they waited. 2 days passed, no response. On the third day, a letter arrived, official seal, cold typeface. Your submission has been reviewed and deemed insufficient for investigation. The rest was legal jargon, but the meaning was simple. They'd been silenced. Rita slammed her hand on the counter. They're bought. All of them. Jack leaned back in his chair, eyes on the dark river beyond the window. Then we go public, online, if we have to. Lily, who had been quiet, looked up. I can help. My school has cameras for the media club. We can show people what's happening. If they see it, they'll care. Jack smiled faintly. That's brave, kid. Rita managed a laugh, the first in days. You three are out of your minds. Maybe, Jack said, glancing at Max, who was wagging his tail beside the kitchen. But at least we're the right kind of crazy. The next morning, they filmed near the drainage hatch. Lily handled the small camera, her hands steady despite the wind. Rita read her brother's letter aloud while Jack pointed to the pipes, leaking into the water. Max stayed alert, head swiveling between sounds. The distant hum of engines, the creak of the dock, the whisper of something moving just out of sight. When they returned to the diner, Lily burst out laughing. Max had somehow found an old metal pot and was wearing it like a helmet. Jack couldn't help grinning. Ready for combat, soldier? He joked. For a moment, the air lightened. Laughter filled the ruined diner like sunlight through smoke. But as night fell, a car slowed outside. Its headlights swept across the boarded windows before it rolled away. Jack's gut tightened. He looked at Jude. Rita, they know. Rita's expression hardened. Then let them come. Outside, the wind carried the smell of gasoline again. Chapter 4. The night the waters rose. The storm came in from the Atlantic like an angry god. By dusk, the sky had turned the color of bruised steel, and the wind screamed through the harbor alleys, rattling loose shutters and tossing debris like confetti at a funeral. Rain fell in slanted sheets, soaking the wooden docks until they gleamed under the flicker of dying streetlights. Jack Miller stood on the diner's porch, watching the water creep closer to the road. Max paced beside him, nose twitching, uneasy. Something in the air smelled wrong, chemical, sharp, unnatural. Inside, Rita was stacking sandbags against the door, muttering curses about the mayor, and those bastards in suits. The radio on the counter hissed through static until a voice broke through. Residents are advised to remain indoors. High tide expected within the hour. Flood warnings in effect for the lower harbor. Then, under the weather alert tone, Another sound crackled faintly. Sirens from the old dam upstream. Jack's heart dropped. They're releasing the dam. He turned toward Rita. That's not a flood warning, it's a flush. Rita's face blanched. You mean? Norval's dumping everything while the storm hides it. Before she could reply, the back door slammed open. Lily stumbled in, drenched and shaking, her raincoat too big for her small frame. Her hair clung to her cheeks like seaweed. Jack, they're doing it right now. I saw the trucks near the river depot. They're pumping into the storm drains. Jack grabbed his coat, already heading for the door. Where? The old storage warehouse by the bridge. You shouldn't have gone out there alone, Rita scolded, but her voice cracked from fear, not anger. I filmed it, Lily said, holding up her phone. But then someone saw me. I think they followed me. Max growled low, staring past the doorway into the rain. Jack felt a chill crawl down his spine. Stay here, he told Rita. Lock the doors. If I'm not back by dawn, call the sheriff. The sheriff's cousin works for Norval, Rita replied bitterly. You're on your own, Jack. Jack nodded once. Then we make our own law. The streets were half flooded when he set out, flashlight cutting through the downpour like a weak blade. Max ran ahead, fur slicked against his lean frame, eyes sharp as twin embers. The water was knee-deep near the bridge, swirling with foam that smelled of oil and rot. Somewhere in the dark, thunder rolled like cannon fire. They reached the warehouse. A hulking shadow crouched beside the river, its corrugated walls rattling in the gale. Jack pushed the door open, waiting inside. The stench hit him instantly. Acrid chemicals mixed with stagnant water. Rows of drums lined the floor, labeled with numbers he recognized from Lily's logbook. A generator roared in the back, powering massive pumps that fed into an open pipe, leading straight to the river. And then he heard it, Lily's voice, muffled and frightened. Let me go! Jack moved fast, Max darting ahead through the puddles. They turned the corner and froze. Ethan Cole stood there, his suit soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, holding Lily by the arm. Gone was the polished executive veneer. His tie hung loose and his eyes burned with desperate fury. Cole sneered when he saw Jack. You don't understand, Miller. This isn't about you or her or that damn river. It's about survival. You shut this down, and half the state loses its lifeline. Jack's voice was ice. Funny, I thought lifelines didn't glow in the dark. Cole's jaw twitched. Walk away. I can make you rich enough to forget all this. Jack stepped forward. You've mistaken me for a man with a price. The words had barely left his mouth when Cole shoved Lily aside and reached into his jacket. Jack lunged, but Max was faster. The shepherd leapt, teeth bared, slamming into Cole's chest. The man crashed backward, the pistol skittering across the wet floor. Max held him pinned, snarling. Lily scrambled up, shaking, her phone still clutched in her hand. Jack shouted, "Get out! Find Rita!" But the warehouse began to groan. The storm surge was forcing river water back through the drainage pipes. One of the pumps sparked, then exploded, showering the room in sparks. We've got to open the relief gate, Jack yelled, or the whole town goes under. He dragged Cole to his feet, tying his wrists with a length of dock rope. You're coming with me. The three of them fought their way to the dam control panel at the far wall. Rusted wheels and levers glistened with rain. Jack strained against the valve, muscles screaming, until the mechanism gave a metallic shriek and began to turn. Outside, the river roared, the pressure easing as floodgates opened. Cole fell to his knees, sputtering. You'll ruin me, he spat. You ruined yourself, Jack replied. Lily, pale but determined, held up her phone again. He just confessed, she said breathlessly. It's all live. What? Cole blinked. Jack smirked. Say hi to the world, Ethan. The camera light blinked red, streaming to every social feed Rita could reach. Within minutes, messages started flooding in. News agencies, activists, local townspeople. The truth once buried in mud was now spreading like wildfire through the storm. Outside, sirens wailed, not warning this time, but salvation. Boats from the Coast Guard maneuvered through the floodwaters, their lights slicing through the rain. Jack stepped out of the warehouse, the storm washing soot and chemical stink from his face. Max trotted beside him, limping slightly, but tail wagging. He looked back at Lily, standing in the doorway, hair whipping in the wind. Behind her, Cole sat slumped against a pillar, defeated, the neon glow of his company's name flickering above him, like a dying star. The floodwaters began to recede. For the first time in months, the river smelled almost clean. Jack knelt beside Max, scratching behind his ear. Good boy, he murmured. Max leaned into him, eyes half closed, the storm's reflection shimmering in his pupils like two tiny lighthouses. Chapter 5. The House That Kept Its Light On. Morning in harbor, Glenn no longer smelled of ash. The air, once heavy with chemicals and despair, now carried the scent of salt and wet pine drifting in from the bay. Seagulls had returned, louder, greedier, and far less poetic than Jack remembered, but their cries were music all the same. The river gleamed under the autumn sun, its surface clear enough to reflect the clouds again. For the first time in years, fish broke the surface, scattering rings of silver light across the water. It had been 6 months since the storm. 6 months since Norval Chemical collapsed under the weight of its own lies. Ethan Cole was now serving a federal sentence, his empire dismantled piece by piece. The court documents called it corporate negligence. The people of Harbor Glen called it justice. The diner, once blackened by fire, had been reborn through the hands of the town itself. Rita, whose laughter now carried across the street like a bell, oversaw every nail, every plank. They named it Harbor House, a half diner, half community workshop. It smelled of coffee, sawdust, and fresh beginnings. A carved wooden sign hung over the doorway. Harbor House, where the light stays on. Jack Miller worked there in the mornings, helping fishermen mend their nets or teaching the younger ones how to fix old engines. His beard had grown thicker, streaked with silver like the foam on the tide, and his shoulders carried less weight now, though his hands still bore the scars of the night the waters rose. He had traded his soldier's uniform for a blue rescue vest, the kind with reflective stripes and mud stains. On his back was stitched the emblem of Harbor Glen Volunteer K-9 Unit. Beside him, Max trotted proudly, wearing his new harness marked SAR, Search and Rescue. His coat shone under the light, darker around the ears, and his eyes held the same calm intelligence that had once guided Jack through chaos. Every morning, Max would greet the townsfolk on their way to work, accepting pats and bacon scraps as payment. "Your partner's becoming a celebrity," Rita teased one morning, pouring Jack his coffee. Jack smirked. "He's always been the good-looking one." From across the room came the sound of youthful laughter. Lily Carson was sitting near the window, a stack of books beside her. She had grown taller, her freckles still scattered like sunlight, but her eyes now shone with the fierce determination of someone who had seen truth up close. A scholarship from the state had taken her into an environmental engineering program, yet she returned every weekend to help at Harbor House. "Rita, your Wi-Fi's down again," Lily said, holding up her laptop. Rita wiped her hands on her apron. "This place runs on kindness, not bandwidth." They all laughed, the kind of laughter that came easily now. It was the sound of a town healing itself. Outside, near the old docks, Ben Harlow, a wiry man in his 50s with sun-baked skin and a permanent squint, waved at Jack. Ben had been a fisherman before the river died. Years of loss had hardened him, but since the restoration project, he'd found his rhythm again. "Tide's bringing them in good, Jack," he called, holding up a silver trout that shimmered in the sunlight. Jack grinned. "Keep a few for lunch. Rita will fry them better than you ever could." "Ha! You wish," Ben shot back, his laugh echoing across the bay. By noon, Harbor House was alive with clatter and chatter. Someone tuned a guitar in the corner, children painted river stones with bright colors, and volunteers patched up rain gear for the next storm season. On the wall hung a framed photo, Jack, Rita, Lily, and Max standing in front of the unreopened diner, the river behind them glinting like a promise. Underneath, in Lily's handwriting, was a line. "The storm cleaned more than water. It cleaned our hearts." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the harbor cranes, Jack stepped outside with Max. The town was quiet, except for the hum of the wind and the distant clink of boats rocking against their moorings. He carried a small wooden plaque he'd carved himself, the grain polished smooth. He knelt by the front steps of Harbor House and hung it beside the door. The words read, "Here, the light is always on, for the lost, the tired, and the hungry." Rita came to stand beside him, her apron dusted with flour. "You think it's too much?" she asked softly. Jack shook his head. "No, it's just enough." Inside, Lily was cleaning up, humming quietly. Max lay stretched across the porch, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. A soft rain began to fall, gentle and cleansing. The streetlights flickered to life, one by one, casting long golden reflections across the wet pavement. Then, as Jack turned to go inside, he felt a tug on his sleeve. Lily stood in the doorway, holding something small, an old dog tag, worn smooth from years of handling. "I found this near the bridge," she said. "Your old one?" Jack took it, eyes softening. The tag was his. U.S. Navy issue, long thought lost. He rubbed the metal between his fingers, the engraved name catching the light. "Guess the river gives back what it owes," he murmured. Rita smiled. "Seems even the waters learned forgiveness." Jack slipped the tag onto Max's collar. "Then we'll wear it together," he said. Max wagged his tail, and the wet ground caught his paw print, a dark, perfect impression on the new concrete steps. The mark shimmered briefly in the rain before fading into the surface, sealed forever like a signature. Someone from the street called out, "Hey, Jack, you leaving the lights on again tonight?" Jack looked up at the glowing sign of Harbor House and smiled. "Always," he said. The river whispered softly in the dark, and for the first time in a long time, Harbor Glen slept without fear. Sometimes miracles don't come as thunder in the sky or angels in white robes. Sometimes they come quietly, in the shape of a man who's been broken and still chooses kindness, or in the loyal heartbeat of a dog who never gave up on his master, or in a town that learns to forgive, to rebuild, to love again. Maybe that's how God works, not through grand gestures, but through small hands that hold on when the world lets go. He sends his grace through ordinary people, a mechanic who becomes a protector, a child who becomes a voice, and a river that finds its way back to life. So, if tonight you find yourself lost, if the world feels too dark or too heavy, remember Harbor House. Remember that there's always a light left on for you. That light is faith. That light is love. That light is God, quietly waiting at your door. May He bless you and guide your steps, and may you too become someone's lighthouse in their storm. If this story touched your heart, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to help more souls find warmth and hope in the light of His grace. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that even in the darkest night, God's light never goes out.